Welcome to the Rational Egoist. I'm your host, Michael Leibowitz. As long as I've been following politics, immigration has always been a hot button issue. I've heard a lot of arguments for, I've heard a lot of arguments against. What I don't hear a lot about, however, is the actual experiences of the people that are trying to get into this country or the experiences of the lawyers that represent them. Today's guest is well equipped to discuss these things as he's been an immigration attorney for some 25 years. Michael Niren, welcome to the Rational Egoist.
Thank you, Michael.
So, for starters, what is it that you do as an immigration attorney?
Well, I run an immigration firm, and it's based actually in Toronto, Canada, although the world is now virtual. So I have the privilege of living here in Delray Beach, Florida, and enjoy the great weather. So our firm handles U.S. and Canada immigration. So those interested in immigrating to Canada, as well as the U.S., and we also do cross-border, U.S.-Canada cross-border. There's a lot of action there. We have a U.S. visa team and a Canadian visa team. I myself don't practice. I haven't practiced for a long time. I'm considered the managing partner. I help run the business. I'm licensed in Ontario, Canada. I don't personally handle U.S. visa cases, but I know a lot about it. And one of the reasons I do is because I immigrated myself from Canada to the United States with my family.
All right. So, in your experience, what motivates people to want to come to this country?
Well, really, at the end of the day, it's the American dream, which still persists. I'm still happy to say, despite the problems we have in this country, compared to other countries, the United States is still an immigrant producing country where it attracts immigration from all over the world, and people come for a better life for themselves and for their children. And that started way back in the early days of the country, and it still persists today.
So, what about the argument that immigrants are trying to come here, specifically from over the southern border for welfare benefits? Is that as common as we're led to believe, or is that overstated?
Well, I don't have any formal statistics on that, but I can tell you from personal experience and just basic economic observations. This country was built on immigration, and it continues to be built on immigration. And look at Silicon Valley, look at the CEOs, the executives, the tech workers, and observe their composition in terms of their backgrounds. Most of them, or many of them, are foreign nationals coming to, as I said, to live out the American dream, be productive, create companies that employ thousands and thousands of people, including Americans. Sure, there are some who come to try to take advantage of the system in terms of welfare, but I can tell you most people coming to the United States are fleeing countries where the state is intervening, where there is a welfare state, and they know the perils of living in such an environment, and they come to the United States for the opportunity to live independently, not living on the welfare state, because they know the negatives. So it's quite ironic that in the media you hear, oh, immigrants are coming to abuse the system. I mean, it's great media talking points, but when you really look at it, the average immigrant is really looking to work, to produce, and to have a better life for their children. And I call it human capital. We need capital from many different sources, but without human capital, we're not going to grow as an economy.
Yeah, I'm inclined to agree with you. I think it's vastly overblown. And if that's the issue, then what we should be arguing for is to get rid of the welfare state, not to limit the freedom of people to come here.
Yeah, I say the same thing exactly. It's really, at the end of the day, even with the welfare state apparatus, that's not what attracts immigrants. But, for those who believe that's the case, you're exactly right. And I say the same thing. Well, eliminate the welfare state. Don't create. If you're against the welfare state because on the grounds that it's state intrusion, it's an area where the government shouldn't be involved in. Well, the solution is not to add regulations on the immigration side, more controls. rather to eliminate the controls that you oppose to in principle. So you're 100% right.
So what is it like for people trying to come to this country, the bureaucracies? I'd imagine they have to navigate just trying to get here. What's that experience like?
Well, it's really daunting. And, people talk about the wall, when Donald Trump was elected and people are out saying that, the solution is a wall, to build a wall. Well, I'll tell you, the biggest wall that exists is not the physical wall, but the legislative wall. That's a wall that's been going on or being, is the case since probably 1996, when Bill Clinton passed legislation or signed legislation, which still exists today, which makes it very, very difficult for well-intended immigrants, people who are very, very qualified, who want to work, who want to thrive in the country, make it very difficult for them to qualify. Number one, the queue, the waiting time in some cases is years and years and years, and that is really the legislative wall that you don't see, but it exists. And I personally have gone through it. It is daunting and difficult.
What's it like as a lawyer? I mean, you said you don't practice yourself any longer, but your firm does. Like, what do you hear about the experience, and maybe when you were practicing? How do lawyers deal with this?
Well, look, they are really, on the front line, and basically they try to work with the government, and that's in parentheses, work with the government to try to help their clients navigate the matrix of immigration. And there's so many components to getting through. There's documents they have to collect. There's applications they have to file. There's fees they have to pay, and there's waiting times. There's just so many different components and complications and technicalities to submitting an application. And then there's also an interview process in some cases where they have to appear before an immigration officer, which is very intimidating, who has all the power in the world to say yes or no after waiting all that time as to whether or not the applicant will be approved for admission. So it is a very daunting, scary, complicated process. And the role of the lawyers is to help advocate for the client, to try to get the client through the system, and ultimately realize their immigration dream.
And how are immigrants? Well, you're an immigrant, so you'll know, at least your own experience. But how are immigrants in general treated by the communities that they move into? And what I want to know also, is there a difference in treatment between people coming from Canada like yourself, or coming from Europe, and people coming from the southern border? Are they treated differently by the natives in the country?
Well, that's a really good question. And, I think there is a difference from our experience. The good news, the United States is still a melting pot. It still welcomes everybody, especially in the big cities where, the immigrant population is massive. Everybody, there's so much multiculturalism. So it's not like it was, in the 50s or prior to that, where immigrants are just seen as Americans. And, often they retain their culture, which I think is a great thing. It adds to the interesting, tape history of various cultures and foods and in the country. But more generally speaking, from a general perspective, immigrants from all nationalities are welcome. Yeah, there's racism that exists; it still exists, but I still hold that that's an exception and not the rule. I know that's controversial to say, but from my experience, immigrants who come here from all nationalities are thrilled to come. Usually in the first few years, it's really tough to get off the ground and to start building a new life. It's very disruptive, but at the end of the day, they most of them, from my experience, have succeeded and have done fantastically. Canadians are very much like Americans culturally. We basically speak the same language, and living here in Florida myself, most of my American friends didn't know I was Canadian until I told them I have a bit of an accent and I say certain things that they don't say. We have a little bit of different terminology for certain things, but other than that, I was welcome with open arms, and I love my American friends, and I'm thrilled to be here.
what I find interesting is that if you go back and you read history and the comments that were made, when the Irish were coming over or when the Italians were coming over, the Jews, the Polish, I mean, the list goes on and on and on. It's the same thing, just rehashed over and over again. They're coming, they're just, they're ruining our culture, they're taking our jobs. And that really never pans out that way. Like, I mean, obviously the culture is going to change, but that's good anyways, to have the culture become more what's the word I'm looking for, more enriched, like you said, different foods, eat different entertainment things. But people are just, it seems a lot of people anyways are just so afraid of change, whether it be changing who their neighbors are, changing how their communities are constructed, changing the voting, patterns, what a change in jobs that they might lose. People seem to be very afraid of change. How do immigrants deal with that when they're coming here and they run up against it? It may not be that common, but certainly I mean, I would assume, I might be wrong, but I would assume that they go through that.
Yeah, and I think often that's the case. They often have to brace themselves, and they know intuitively they're entering into a new culture, a new country. I think most of them are well equipped for the friction they may encounter with other people who they're not used to dealing with. But I do hold that these days versus the days when the Irish came and the Italians came and the Jews came, we have a lot more inclusive, pluralistic country, which is much more immigrant friendly, and that applies to Canada, United States, and also many European countries. So, whereas in the past, if you were a Jew, and I'm Jewish background, I have a Jewish background. If I immigrated in the 50s or the 40s or the 30s, I would be, and I know from my grandparents and what their experience was, there was a lot of anti-Semitism and there was a lot of issues in terms of them being accepted in their communities. Not to say that doesn't exist today, and I really believe it does exist today, but just knowing the kind of culture we live in, which is more pluralistic and more accepting, I don't think the general immigrant faces the kind of challenges that that they did historically. That's not to say that there aren't, those who are, let's call them nativists, um, uh, who just look at others and say, "Hey, you know what? You're coming in, you're taking my jobs, you're invading my culture." I think those people will always exist in every era, in every society, and we have to fight against it. And the immigrant story is an argument against it because no, they don't take jobs, they create jobs. No, they don't intrude on your culture. They add to it, as you say. It's just that's what America is. It's pluralistic, and the immigrant component is a major part of that. So, we got to fight against that narrative all the time.
Do you happen to know how immigrants compare to native born Americans when it comes to the standard measures of success, income, profits, business owned, quality of life, all the trappings, I guess is what you would call them. Do they compare favorably or less favorably? Do you happen to know?
I know there are statistics out there which speak to that. I can say anecdotally, and from others I've spoken to, and even in my own business, immigrants who come, and this has always been the case, are hyper motivated to succeed. Often they have very, very good work ethics, very education focused. I mean, it's a stereotype, but I'll just, the Asians, the South Asians who come, are often, the children of those immigrants often go on to higher education, become doctors and lawyers and business owners, and extremely successful. We see it every day. So, if you're going to take the average immigrant, their work ethic, their attitude is really something that Native Americans should adhere to, or should look up to, because that's really what the American spirit's all about. to come from another country. Let's just like it happened back in 1700s, where they came from Britain, they had nothing, and they wanted to build a life for themselves. That hasn't changed in 2023. So to answer your question, I mean, I don't have any formal statistics, but look at Silicon Valley, as I just mentioned earlier. Look at how many CEOs and successful professionals there are who are immigrants, who are doing fantastically. Thank God. So, I know I may be sounding a little biased because I'm in the industry, but I'm on the front line. I see this every day in my job. These people and their families are so excited to come, and they have fantastic work ethic, and they just want to work. They don't want to live off the system.
What's the most rewarding part of what you do?
Well, it's interesting. I was just on a podcast by a client who actually moved to Florida, moved to South Florida, and he started his own podcast. And the theme of his podcast are, people who are immigrating to Florida and their challenges. And he's doing quite well. And he wanted to interview me because I was his lawyer. And, he opened the podcast with a big fat thank you for helping him and his family and his children navigate the immigration system and successfully immigrate to the United States. And this is his first year, and he's facing all the challenges that new immigrants face in terms of, starting a new business and making friends. But he really, the feeling of knowing that I've contributed to help upgrade someone's life through our services, it is really gratifying. Knowing that I've played a role in helping another exercise the mobility rights, even though those rights aren't fully recognized, and actually giving them the platform to have a better life. That's really huge. And when I see that happen in real life, it's worth it.
See, I wish more people would see it that way, that people are coming here and they're just realizing, like you said, the American dream. Their lives are being so greatly enhanced, and they're not taking away from our quality of life. These are just amazing stories that come out of this. And so many people, and so a lot of people get it. I know that, but so many don't. And I just wish more would. I wish more would understand it from the perspective that you're sharing.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So
Yeah.
what is the most frustrating part of what you do?
Well, from a technical perspective, it's really, battling the regulations and going through the bureaucracy. It's very tough, and the clients are often very impatient, and understandably so. They're paying a lot of money. They're waiting in the queue. They don't know what's going on with their application. Sometimes it's a black hole. You submit the application, it's in the bureaucratic black hole, I call it. And even us lawyers don't have full transparency into what's going on. And we have to tell our clients, just sit tight and wait. And it's very frustrating for us, but it's very frustrating for them. So that's the main. It's their pain is our pain, and it's always the government's driven issues. Some of the officers or the government officials are actually very nice to deal with and very sympathetic, but they are also part of the system. So it's not, I'm not pointing fingers at any individuals, because we see them as partners. We work with them to try to, help our clients. But this is a system that has been erected, and it's a broken system, a severely broken system. And that's by far the most frustrating thing. You can probably ask any immigration lawyer, they'll say exactly the same thing.
I can imagine.
Yeah.
Do you happen to know how America compares to other countries when it comes to openness to immigrants coming in?
That's a great question. From what I know, and I can speak to Canada and the United States specifically. Canada has a more open immigration system. It's more liberalized. It's by far not perfect, but it definitely has a superior program. It has more categories that immigrants can qualify for. The United States is a very antiquated system. They also have quotas based on your nationality, so you're literally discriminated if you come, let's say, from the Philippines versus Canada.
Really?
Oh yeah, I mean,
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah, there's quota systems. There's a whole bunch of barriers and very limited categories that immigrants can qualify for, plus the enormous queue. Now there is a waiting period for Canada, I know as well, but it's certainly not as bad as the United States. I mean, I can't speak to other countries. I know Australia has a similar system to Canada. The UK, I really don't know. But as far as Canada and United States are concerned, Canada has a superior system in terms of welcoming immigrants and processing immigrants. But trust me, it has its problems also.
What proposals are there out there to, I hate the word, but I don't have a better one, reform the immigration system in America? First of all, are there any? Is there anybody that works on trying to get this system right, other than, the sort of rebel rousers who just, build the wall, build the wall? Are there any serious people actually working on this? And if so, what are some of the proposals?
Well, there are immigration organizations which advocate for immigration reform. And there's many of them. American Immigration Lawyers Association, AILA, is one of them that represents the lawyers, immigration lawyers in the United States. It's a huge organization. And there's others that advocate for immigration reform. And there are some lawyers in the country who are at the forefront of that. But because of the way the American system is built, nothing really gets done. So as I said, since 1996, where a certain legislation was passed under President Clinton, nothing has materially changed since then. Isn't that shocking? I mean, there's been tweaks, there's been some executive orders, some repealed executive orders, but at the end of the day, fundamentally, can you imagine, nothing has been changed since back then. So we're talking about gridlock, and this doesn't exist only in the immigration space and other areas of like taxation and other areas.
Sure.
So there's a lot of talk about immigration reform, of, for example, modeling a merit-based immigration system, which Canada has. So you apply as a skilled worker based on your education, your work experience, and other factors, and it's a point system, and you can qualify based on certain points without necessarily having a job offer or be formally sponsored. Canada has that system. I believe Australia has that system. So they were talking about that actually under President Trump, but when there's a change of administration,
Yeah.
nothing materializes.
How about, have you heard of Trump's proposal? And I imagine there's others out there as well who want to do away with birthright citizenship.
Yeah, I've heard of it, and that's one of the talking points. I think that appeals to the nativists. It does nothing for the country. It does nothing for immigrants. It does nothing for the people who live here as citizens. It's always historically been in most democratic free countries that you acquire citizenship by birth. It's just one of the most socialist or dictatorship countries, they don't acknowledge and do that. So to me, that's a sign, a signal of what I would consider nationalism, which is or more philosophically speaking, collectivism, which is really based on the idea that if you're not born here originally, you're not a native, you're not welcome. And that's a very dangerous signal and a very dangerous trend for something much larger and much more sinister. So this birthright citizenship issue is, it comes out of the fear that people are just coming to the United States, legally or illegal, to have babies. And all of a sudden they're called anchor babies and to grant them citizenship. Let me ask, my opponents in this debate, what's wrong with that? Don't you want more human capital? Don't you want more people coming in? I mean, unless you're a protectionist, an economic protectionist who believes there's a finite amount of jobs, there's a finite amount of goods and services that will never grow, why don't we want more human capital? So, I mean, it's the same thing we've been talking about earlier. So, yeah.
Well, first of all, it's codified in the 14th Amendment that we have birthright citizenship. I know that they try to get around that, whatever. They can make whatever fallacious arguments they want. But I find it rather rich that the same people that often argue we're not opposed to legal immigration, it's just illegal. Well, it's the not only statutory law, but it's constitutional law that if you're born here, you're a citizen. So what happened to we just want it to be legal? You know what I mean? It's just what it boils down to is they just don't want foreigners coming to the country. I don't really, I mean, they can dress it up, they say whatever they want. And I'm not saying this about every single person that wants there to be secure borders or some restrictions. I'm talking about your build the wall.
Right.
That's the people I'm talking about, because oftentimes you get in these discussions and people feel they're being caught in a sort of dragnet and being referred to, when that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about the people that are chanting at rallies, build the wall, that want to do away with the birthright citizenship. That's the people I'm talking about. And it just seems ridiculous to me. And it's obviously to me a sort of xenophobia. I don't know
Yeah.
how else to describe it.
Yeah, it is a xenophobia. If you ever saw the great movie, The Gangs of New York,
Yes, I did. Yeah.
haven't, that, that was, a movie about the Irish immigrants way back in the early days. And, the xenophobic, nativists versus the Irish who came in, and literally the gangs of New York on the streets, the Irish and the nativists literally fought on the streets of New York. And it's actually based on true historical events. That, in 2023, we have our own version of that, of the gangs of New York. The argument that, well, I'm for legal immigration and they should just come legally is a red herring. That's a red herring argument. And it's because the reason it's a red herring argument is because, as I said, the biggest wall is a legislative wall. No wall that Trump or any of these people will erect could ever be as high and as secure as the legislative wall that exists today. Most immigrants, the vast majority of immigrants, do not want to come illegally, do not want to risk their lives with human traffickers. They want to apply the right way because they're good. They just are law-abiding people in their own respective countries, but they're stuck in this queue. So tell me that, oh, well, they should just come legally. So I'm a software engineer from India. I have all the, the talent and the motivation to make America great, but yet I'm waiting a year or 2 years for my visa process. Why, and the argument to that person, well, you should just come legally. Like, give me a break. Give me a break. So
So if I had the power to make Michael Niren immigration czar, and you can have any type immigration system that you could, what would you have it?
I love that question. I've been asked that question before.
Oh man, you just stole my thunder. I like to be original.
Well, but I mean, I like how you put it. Immigration czar. No one called me that. Basically, I would eliminate the need for immigration lawyers, including myself. I wouldn't have any rules regarding immigration whatsoever. I would, and it sounds very, am I for open immigration? Emphatically, I am. Number two, I would disband the welfare state because, I don't think anyone should be entitled to state-sponsored programs like that. I think, there's other ways. And before the welfare state existed, we had robust charity that existed to help people who had, and even back then when income and the standard of living wasn't what it was today. And this is, I don't want to deviate from the topic, but basically, I think there are other ways to do this. Bottom line is, yes, there are some bad people who come to the country. And yes, there are bad people who live in the country and who were born in the country. But that's not an argument for, let's say you have an American citizen who was born in Chicago. If that American citizen decides to go to Florida, should there be a checkpoint? Should there be like a border guard at the state that says, let me check your papers, like they did in the Soviet Union? Well, what's the difference from, a border between countries or across seas? There's nothing in principle different. Now, some would argue that, well, America is a sovereign nation and we have to protect our borders. 100%. But that's not necessarily the role of an immigration officer who puts a stamp on a passport. That's the role of the Army, Navy, Marines. They're supposed to protect our borders. They're equipped to that, not a visa officer.
Yeah, to protect our borders from invading armies, not migrant
Sure.
farmers.
That's right.
I mean,
So look, I've said a lot of controversial things, and I may get a lot of. I'm used to that. But yes, the answer to your question is I'd be happy to disband or to eliminate the need for my profession.
Listen, I'm in 100% agreement with you on because for two reasons. One, I'm an originalist when it comes to constitutional interpretation, and on an originalist interpretation, I see nothing in the federal constitution that gives the federal government authority over who comes in and out of this country. They have authority over naturalization, but that's very different to decide who becomes a citizen and deciding who can and can't come in. They also have authority to protect against invasion from armies, from countries with whom we are at war, not immigrants. And it's really sloppy language or just dishonest language when people make the argument it's an invasion on the southern border. Somebody said that to me on Facebook. Don't you know what it's an invasion? And then I posted a picture of D-Day and I said, that's an invasion. Do you
Right.
not see the difference?
Well, that's a
Big,
tactic, right?
yeah,
Using common language in a way to put forward someone's narrative. Invasion, even the term rights, have been abused. That term, as you know, has been abused. So you just take a common language, common sense term, and you twist it and you amplify it, and you call something what isn't. And you're 100%
yeah.
right. There's no such thing as an invasion of
Yeah,
immigrants.
yeah, and I think a rights argument is strong for allowing open immigration. One, the rights of the immigrants, the right to mobility, the right to move, but also the right of people in this country. Why don't I have the right if I have a house to have somebody from another country come stay with me or rent from me? Or if I'm a business owner, why don't I have the right to employ whomever I want to, whomever I can get to do the best work for the best price? So you're not, it's an individual rights thing on both ends. Both the rights of the people coming in and the rights of the citizens here. If you don't want to deal with them, don't deal with them. That's also your right.
That's right. Rights are inherent in the individual, not in the nation. And the founding fathers made that clear that, man, woman, is someone who's a right holder. They're the sovereign, not the nation. And the role of the nation or the state is to protect the rights of the sovereign individual. So when an immigrant comes, that person is a right holder, whether or not, if they're from another country that doesn't recognize rights, it's not that they're not entitled to those rights. They're just from a country that doesn't recognize those rights. America is a moral country because it's supposed to be, at least, because it's the only nation that's supposed to recognize those rights. And that obviously would apply, that argument and that perspective obviously would apply to immigrants and those who want to hire them. Freedom of production and trade, right? So, if you want to hire someone, that's trade. If an immigrant wants to come and work, that's production. If they want to physically come, that's mobility. That's all rights.
Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely. People argue it's risky, but risk inheres in life itself. Life is a risky proposition. We can't eliminate risks. And I did 25 years in prison. When I was in prison, I was relatively safe. I'd take freedom any day with the risks that come with it. And it boggles my mind that more people don't grasp that we're talking about liberty. Yes, it's scary. It can be dangerous, but it's so much better than living in a, I don't want to use totalitarian because that's hyperbolic, but living under a regime that is oppressive. Even if it's not as oppressive as some other places, it's still oppressive, and I prefer freedom any day.
Yeah.
So, Michael, before I let you go, is there anything I neglected to ask, or anything you would like to say, or you think needs to be said on this subject?
I don't think so. That was a great comprehensive overview. And you asked all the right questions, and hopefully I answered them well. So I have nothing further to add, other than, I hope for the future that there is immigration reform, and I hope it goes in the right direction. I'm cautiously optimistic because the voices are getting louder and louder. So we'll have to wait and see.
Do you have a website or a blog or anything where people can go find you?
Yeah, sure. It's visaplace.com, www.visaplace.com, and that's where our firm is, and you can always contact us there.
Beautiful. Well, thank you very much for coming on, and thanks for sharing your perspective. All right. For now, this is the Rational Egoist. I'm Michael Leibowitz signing out. Remember, like, share, comment, subscribe. Till next time.